Hi, everybody. Thank you all for coming today. It's great to see so many people here. And my name is James Button. I am a journalist, a writer, and I've known Michael Gawenda for a very long time. He was my editor at The Age for many years. He was also my editor at Time Australia magazine. And we've been colleagues for a very long time, and we've also been very good friends for a long time. And Michael probably doesn't need an introduction, but I'll give you one. He was editor of The Age for 7 years and left of his own accord, which is unusual for editors in newspapers. And he then went on to be US correspondent for the Fairfax papers. He did many things over a very long and illustrious career, and today he is a writer. And last year he published a wonderful book, which I hope many of you have read, My Life as a Jew. If you haven't read it, please get yourself a copy. It's a memoir, but it's also full of ideas. It's got so many different facets to it as a book. It's got even, I think, a really original analysis of Hannah Arendt and her writing about Eichmann in Jerusalem, and there's so much in the book. And I think today we're going to use the book less as the front and centre of our discussion than as the backdrop, because a lot has happened since Michael's book was published on October the 5th last year. So Michael, let me start right there. I want to ask you, I think we'll talk for about 35 minutes, and then I want to hear from you. I'd like to leave 15, 20 minutes for questions from the audience. Let's start with, your book was published was launched on October the 5th last year. Pretty timely in light of subsequent events. The subject of our discussion today is on being Jewish. So I want to ask you, Michael, first of all, what are the words on being Jewish? What did they mean to you in the past and coming up to the launch of your book on October the 5th? And what do they mean to you nearly a year later, 10 months later?
What does it mean to be a Jew? God help me.
Yeah.
I can summarise it this way. I think that growing up, and as a young adult, and as a middle-aged adult, as a journalist, as a person living and working in Australia, having a family, I think I would have described myself as a Jewish Australian. I think I would now describe myself as a Jew and an Australian. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that I have reclaimed the word Jew, which is a word that anti-Semites claimed. When they wanted to say something bad about Jewish people, they never used the term Jewish, they used the term Jew. He's not a dirty Jewish person, he's a dirty Jew. And I think we Jews need to reclaim the word Jew. I'm a Jew. That's why it was in the title, My Life as a Jew. Not my life as a Jewish person, right? My life as a Jew. It's meaningful. And I think the book actually examines why I have reclaimed the word Jew. Yeah. Why I now, whenever I'm not asked that all the time because most people know, but if I'm asked that, I say I'm a Jew. Right? I'm a Jew, and I'm many other things as well, but I do that because I want to reclaim that word. The anti-Semites don't own it. The people that don't like Jews don't own it. We ought to own it. Yeah. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that when I was writing this book, the book in part was about what did I actually think it meant to be a Jew? What had it meant in my life? Had that changed? How had it changed? And I think that's what the book was an exploration of. You know, I don't want to promote anything much, but there was an article in Haaretz today about me. There was a profile of me in Haaretz. And the young reporter who wrote the profile said that he asked me how it had changed for me being Jewish. What had I concluded? Where had I gone? And he quotes me at the end saying, I actually don't think I said exactly what he says. I said, but he's right. That being a Jew now means for me that I believe in Jewish continuity, that I want to be part of a people that have a future, that I am, for reasons that I can't even necessarily explain. It's not rational. It's some other thing. It's genetic, I think. It's coming to terms with what, I've forgotten his name, he's quoted in my book, said about being a Jew. It's a fate.
Oh, no.
No.
Memi.
Yeah, Memi.
Yeah. Albert Memi.
It's our fate to be Jews. And that includes people who convert. They had that fate, they just didn't know it until they converted. So I think that thing, and where does that come from? That comes from having children, where I thought, do I want my children? Have I done everything I can? Do I want my children to be Jews? And if I do, how have I made that happen? How have I... And I thought, and I described in my book that I failed in that. I didn't care much about that. Well, I certainly didn't care enough. Luckily, my failure wasn't their failure. They took a path. They took me on a Jewish journey. So I think people here will understand that. It's irrational, this thing about why do we care that Jews have a future? Why do we care? Look, there's been 4,000 years or whatever it is. Some people talk in 10,000 years. It feels like we are prehistoric. Why does it have to... everything ends. Why can't this end? Why is this... Why are we different than all other people? Well, I don't know, except that we're still here. And that all those times where... And not just still here, but we Jews, I'm talking amongst friends here, we Jews have had an absolutely outsized impact on this world and still having. It's kind of, I sort of believe in God when I think of that. I think, how is it possible that this small tribe of people have had this outsized impact, certainly on European culture, on medicine, on law, on literature, on all. How is that possible? How is that? How is that possible? And I don't think it's God-given, obviously, even though I'm not sure. But I don't think it is.
He's hedging his bets.
Yeah, you've got to hedge your bets. I mean, I don't know about that. And certainly it can be misunderstood when you say it to people who they think, oh, another person who thinks the Jews are the fucking chosen people. So excuse my language, my wife is looking at me as if I think they can all take it in. So you want to be careful with that. But the fact is that I feel like there are good reasons for humanity in general for the Jews continuing to exist. That humanity would be the poorer for it if this small group of people There's 15 million of them in the world if they cease to exist. And so I kind of believe that not only Jews have an investment in Jewish continuity, but everybody has. Everybody has. It's not, look, there's no way that America wouldn't be poorer if there were no Jews, if the United States had no Jews. Europe would be poorer. I think Europe is poorer for the fact that it annihilated more than half of its Jewish population. I mean, Germany was once a cultural capital of the world, and half of that cultural capital was Jewish, right? Where are they now? They're not in the same position that they were pre-war. Anyway, stop talking.
But answer your own question. How is it the Jewish people have had that outsized impact if it's not God?
Oh, look, I think there are a number of different reasons. There's lots of, in part, they've had it because for the whole of their existence, post the destructions of the temple, they have been forced to live separately, and they've been forced to continue. I mean, it's not like for a lot of the time they couldn't assimilate. I mean, in Jewish history, when Jews had the opportunity to assimilate, they did. You know, I mean, Jewish communities disappeared because they were given the opportunity to disappear. So one of the reasons is that they were forced to continue. The second thing is, I think that Judaism is a religion of, in many ways, it's a religion of the mind. It's a religion of the intellect. It's a religion about learning. So education has been central, even to Jews who rejected Judaism. Education was central to their sense of themselves and what they wanted to give their children. So there was that. There is that. And then there is mystery, which I can't. There is a mystery.
Yeah.
After I say all of that stuff, I say there's a mystery, and when I say there's a mystery, I mean that it can't be wholly rationally explained. So when it can't be wholly rationally explained, you think maybe someone up there is doing it. I don't believe that, James.
I know you don't. Let's talk about the last 12 months or 10 months, Michael. One thing that Michael is great at is thinking through very hard issues and questions. I've always gone to him to try to understand an issue from somebody who reads a hell of a lot of media, thinks about the world through the prism of journalism, through being a reporter, and through all the work that, asking people all the questions and then distilling the questions into an answer. And it's probably, for most of us, never been harder, really, in some ways, than in this past 10 months, to think through, how we should think about the absolutely horrific events of October the 7th. The clear emergence, not just emergence, but rise of anti-Semitism particularly in Western countries, the devastation of Gaza and the killing there, what to do about Hamas, which is committed to the destruction of Israel, and then the rise of really ugly elements within the Israeli government as well. The far right, managed by somebody who, it seems clear, is basically intent on all that matters for him is staying out of prison, the Prime Minister. All these things in this kind of really difficult. How have you thought through the events of the last 10 months, and what inner struggles have you had, in trying to understand what has happened and to come up with a kind of view about what should happen? Tell us about your process over those 10 months.
I guess that I guess the first thing to say is that what happened on October the 7th kind of shocked me. Did shock me, of course. I mean, shocked me. But I think I kind of saw it coming. Not the event, the response to the event. I couldn't imagine that Hamas was going to be able to. Could I imagine that the Israeli military and security establishment could be so incompetent that they would leave a group of unarmed girls sitting in those watchtowers, right? Who were meant to do what if something happened? What were they meant to do? They weren't even armed. Could I imagine that that would be the case? That Hamas would be able to organise breaks in that fence, 40 breaks in the fence along where those watchtowers were, and those poor girls could look down and see what was happening and do nothing about it. I couldn't imagine that. Who could imagine that? And how the people who let that happen have survived and are still in government and in military intelligence is beyond me. So I couldn't imagine that. But the response is about where I live, not about over there. The response here did not surprise me. I mean, and the response here meant that I couldn't deal with what were the main issues, because I was constantly dealing with what I believe was an outbreak of. It was there under the surface. It was coming all the time, particularly on the left, of incredible hostility, hatred of not necessarily of Jews, but certainly hatred of Israel and Israelis, which spilled over into a hatred of Jews. I mean, I was not shocked, like some people were, by the protest in the Opera House on October the 9th. I had seen this coming. My book describes these things coming. I fell out with a friend because she was heading in this direction. And it was a direction that I couldn't go, and that I felt like we were going to have have nothing to talk about. So I wasn't surprised by that. That all said, I think that a couple of things. I fear that we have crossed a threshold in Australia where Jew hatred, hostility to Jews is legitimate. I don't want to talk about anti-Semitism. I think it obfuscates the real. There is a dislike of Jews that has grown over this past 10 months, that you see in the media, a coldness about them, a sort of lack of understanding of what they may be feeling, that to me signifies that there is a kind of, dislike, hostility to Jews. You know, it's like, what's his name, Aboriginal leader, said, Noel Pearson said prior to in his Boyer lectures, he said, we are not liked by the Australian people. They tolerate us at best. They don't want to be our friends. They don't want to be our supporters, apart from, support that is easy, right? Well, I kind of feel like, we're not like the Indigenous people, Jews, but I feel a bit like that Jews are not liked by a lot of people. I'm not saying by most Australians even, but amongst people that I thought I was friends with, and I thought we shared political goals and political interests, I discovered that they really didn't like Jews.
But is it a more educated and left thing?
Yeah. I don't think it's. I don't think it's most Australians. I think it's not most Australians, but it is Australians who are on the left. They're educated. They're influential. They run the universities. They are the major players in journalism. They are. If you listen to what's his name on Media Watch,
Paul Barry.
I mean, I don't care what he says. I care about his tone. I care about his tone. There is this contempt for Zionists, calls them Zionists, contempt for the lobby, contempt for the. I mean, this is journalist. He's a journalist, right? And he gets away with that. He can do that, right? And that is widespread in journalism, I reckon. It's widespread in the universities. So there is that. There is that. At the same time, I have basically written and said nothing about the conflict because I have nothing to add. I have nothing. If I could, I wrote that in the book. If I could go and be a reporter, I'd report it, right? I'd write what I see and what I know, but I just don't know enough. I don't trust the journalism that I read, and so I try to say nothing. But here, I'll tell you, I think that I thought it before, I think it even more now. I think more than anything, this Israeli government is responsible for where Israel and us Jews find ourselves now. I think this has been the most appalling government in Israel's history. I mean, I think to be able to, what people expect, Jews expect non-Jewish people not to be appalled when someone like Smotrich, who is a minister in this government, says, if we could, we'd starve the 2 million people of Gaza. And we're meant to say, defend that, not him, but say, oh, well, he doesn't really count, he doesn't matter, he doesn't make, it's bull dust. He is a senior minister in the government. Ben Gvir, who has terrorism offences, he was convicted of terrorism offences, is the Minister for National Security, he's the Minister of Police, for heaven's sake. How is that in any way acceptable? So, but, there's always a but. But where I think, what I think has happened and what I think we have been unable to combat is that all of those people who want Israel to disappear have won that argument, Nothing I've just said now justifies the disappearance of Israel. You know, just like nothing that Donald Trump has done 4 years in government means you can entertain a notion of America needs to be disappeared.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Israel's the only country where appalling governments lead to the conclusion that it ought to not exist. I mean, this is just craziness. You know, the demonstrators at the university, the demonstrators on the streets, many of them, I am sure many of them are people of goodwill who are appalled by what's happening in Gaza. But they're not campaigning for 2 states. They're not campaigning for peace. They're campaigning for the eradication of Israel. If you look at their placards, if you look at what they carry, if you look at posters that are putting the Star of David, whatever, in a rubbish bin, what are they campaigning for? How is it? So that's where we've ended up too. And I blame for that, I blame my left-wing comrades.
Let's talk more about that.
For letting that happen, for not standing up and saying this is a step too far, right? They haven't done that. The government has tried to say that. but they've been weak on it because politically it's a difficult thing to do. So that's where I think we are. If you want to know what I think about now, I think Israel's in terrible trouble. I think it's really in terrible trouble. It hasn't achieved what it set out to achieve in Gaza. It is, yes, tens of thousands of people have been killed. There's no exit that I can see coming. They're not really, or Netanyahu is not really interested in a ceasefire. What are they doing? Meanwhile, on their border, there is a force that that is 10 times the strength of Hamas, and 100,000 Israelis have had to be shifted out of their homes. I mean, Israel has lost. Israel has lost. And even now, there is no way, because it has ended up in this situation, you still have a government in place there that won't do what their security apparatus is telling them, what the military is telling them, which is make a deal. Make a deal. We've done everything we can do. Make a deal. So that's where we've ended up.
Let's talk about friend. You mentioned an old friend before. Can you maintain, and have you maintained, friendships with people who disagree with you? And when there is disagreement, which of your friendships have survived and which have not? I think this is an issue for a lot of people on this question. You're right. There is a lot of there's a lot of emotion and hostility around it, and I'm sure a lot of friendships for a lot of people have ended in this time.
Look,
so, tell us about your history.
I have. There are two or three. There are two. Is that me?
Yeah, I think.
So someone's recording it. Replace it, Evie. It says replace. Okay, so there have been friendships, some.
I do.
That have ended, and there have been friendships that have been strained, but haven't ended. And the reasons, look, I'll tell you, it's a simple thing in a way. Those people who are not Jewish, but are friends, that were friends, I found it very difficult to maintain those friendships if they didn't understand what October 7th meant to me and my life, right? If they didn't understand that, it was very hard to move on with the friendship post that, right? And that happened, right? That happened. And those friendships ended. Otherwise, most friendships haven't ended, but they've cooled. They're we're not in touch as often as we were before. Former colleagues in journalism that I was pretty close to, haven't been in touch with me for months, right? Even though they were in touch immediately afterwards. So that's happened. Amongst Jewish people, I have ended friendships as well. And they have ended because, for various reasons, but I couldn't be. It was impossible. It's impossible for me now to have Jewish friends who believe Israel should cease to exist. It's impossible. I couldn't have that friendship now, because what does that mean? What does that mean? What do they actually think should happen? And I can't talk to them about that because they don't basically want to talk about that. So that, you know, I think I couldn't be friends now with people that some of whom I grew up with, who went on the pro-Palestinian marches, who were there with the people holding placards, Israel is a genocidal, you know, state that has to, whatever, right? So that has happened. But I haven't gone where some people have gone, but some of whom you know, James, where I've gone from being a social democrat, a socialist, you know, to being a Trump supporter, or a, you know, I am not that. I remain committed to the left in the way that I have always. I've been left by some of my comrades, right? But I'm still where I always was. And then there's Jewish people who were my friends, remain my friends, but I think that they should have said more about anti-Semitism and about what was going on in some of the marches and some of the universities. They should have said more about that than they've said. I think that they made political decisions not to do so. Some of you know who I'm talking about. Some people here know who I'm talking about.
My eyes aren't as good as they used to be. 15 minutes. Okay, we're running out of time.
Okay, let's do...
We'll do some questions? Yeah, for sure.
John Lyon has just been awarded something for being a fair and even-handed reporter on the Israeli-Gaza war. He's an ABC reporter, but I've read his stuff. I don't think he's fair at all. What do you think?
Okay, so firstly, I don't know what something is. What's he being?
He's won an award for his writing on the Israeli-Gaza.
But who gave him the award?
I don't know.
The ABC gave him the award?
Some award that was given up in Sydney to a whole lot of journalists at the weekend.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, can I... Look. I wrote about John Lyons in my book and about the sort of...
the year at the 2024 Kennedy Awards for
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the Kennedy Awards, right, okay.
A reporter here.
No, Kennedy Awards.
Check the facts.
The Kennedy Awards are serious awards.
Oh, sorry. Here we go. ABC's Global Affairs editor John Lyons has been honoured as Journalist of the Year at the 2024 Kennedy Awards for Outstanding Journalism.
Yeah. John Lyons. Yeah, the Kennedy Awards are serious journalism awards, actually. So, okay, he's won that award. Look, I have resigned from the journalism union. I was a life member of that union. I have not been able to be published in The Age. I'm trying to tell you something about what I think is a bias of journalism rather than about... So I will never win a Kennedy Award for outstanding journalism. I might have 20 years ago, but I wouldn't today. I would not be appointed an editor of any Australian newspaper now. No Jewish person like me is going to, who has expressed the views I've expressed, is ever going to, ever's a long time, now be appointed as an editor of an Australian newspaper because the staff simply wouldn't accept it. No Jew like me, Jewish journalist like me, is going to be appointed the managing director of the ABC and the editor-in-chief of the ABC, because the staff would walk out. It would not happen. It could not happen. You know? An anti-Zionist Jew might get that job. Right? That's possible, but I could never someone like me could never. So what am I saying? I have made no judgment of John Lyons's coverage of the Gaza Israel Hamas war. I have made no judgment in publicly about the coverage in general. I'll tell you why. Because it's difficult. It's a difficult job. It's hard to do. I don't want to be what I want to be. I want to criticise. I want to examine standards. What standards are these journalists following? What are the ethical principles under which they're working? When I wrote about John Lyons in my book, the main problem I had with John Lyons was he was a senior executive of the ABC, he wrote a book about how journalists, including journalists that worked for him, were being silenced by the Jewish lobby in Australia. I mean, this is outrageous. He was a senior executive at the ABC. The only journalist that wasn't nobbled by the lobby was John Lyons. That's what he said. So that was my issue with John Lyons. And then I had issues about his reporting in the book. And I pointed those out. He never contradicted those things. He made stuff up, frankly, and I said so. And he never answered that. So I've got to tell you, I don't listen or watch or read the ABC anymore. I do not. On this issue. On others as well. I've forgotten the last time I've watched the 7:30 report, or not because of this. I think their journalism is crappy. On this particular issue, I've got 100 different sources. If I want to read good stuff about Gaza and Israel, I mean...
What do you read?
Well...
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I read Haaretz.
Yeah.
I read the Times of Israel. I read as much as I can get of... there's a major Israeli newspaper that... Ynet.
You read something on the New York Times?
I read the New York Times. I do read the New York Times. I read the Wall Street Journal, which has a different take on Israel. No, nothing. Not because the Australian newspapers can't compete in terms of staff, resources. I mean, the 9 newspapers, the Australian, they don't even have a correspondent in Israel. They're getting their stuff from other places. I don't need to read that. You know, so I read, so there's plenty of good places to go. Even the Times of Israel, which is free, they have good coverage and fair. It's just they haven't got a depth of reporting that Haaretz has got. But Haaretz is, look, it's got a slant. It's more left wing than any paper in Australia, really. But its reporting is good. And some of its commentary is really good.
European outlets? Anything in the Arab world?
I don't read Arab. I don't. I should probably.
Podcasts?
Yeah, podcasts. There are good podcasts. There are good podcasts. I mean, from left to right. I mean, I know a lot of people don't like Ezra Klein, for instance. But on this issue, he has had really good people on that you don't find anywhere else. And he's interrogated them well. He's well worth listening to.
I'm going to stop you. There's a gentleman. First of all, a gentleman at the back, and then we'll come to you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Michael, I want to take you back 10 years, actually. You came during the last incursion or battle between Israel and Gaza. Many Jewish people in the Melbourne community cancelled their subscriptions to The Age in response to what I would call the broad editorial coverage at that time. And you very bravely came to our community and spoke. about your role as a Jewish editor of The Age.
But I wasn't editor 10 years ago.
Yes, I was thinking that you weren't there, but you spoke about the role of the editor in
But I wasn't the editor.
okay, I want to go through what you said at that time.
Oh, briefly, please.
I'll be very brief. No. Your core point 10 years ago, as a Jew working in journalism, was that when you get reports coming in from Gaza and Israel at that time, you said that it was very important. We needed to understand the perspective of the Age editorial staff. They had a narrative perspective on what was reported, and irrespective of what was the reporting, the headline and the way that the articles would be presented would have to reflect the narrative of the readers.
I never said that. I never said that. There's no chance I said that. No chance I said that.
Do you have a question? Yes.
Well, I was going to say, I would have thought from your book that you would be totally against that perspective.
I never said that. I would never say that. I never supported a narrative that the editorial of the staff of The Age. What I said was that, and what I said in the book and what I said at the time was, we cover, I'm a Jewish editor, but the fact that I am Jewish has nothing to do with the way we cover this issue. This issue is covered, like every other issue, according to journalistic principles that I have talked about endlessly at the paper, and we're going to do it the same way as we do any other issue. Yes, there were times when I thought, when I had to tell the correspondent, I think you got that wrong, and this needs to be fixed. There were times when they put headlines on stories. I wasn't there 24 hours a day, where I had to tell them that was a bad headline. Next time, don't do it. But I never.
Cartoon, yeah.
Yes, Michael Learning drew a cartoon, that I didn't like, that I thought, and others too, not just me, that equated Israel with Nazis. I wasn't going to have that. Nowadays, I'm sure that's everywhere, right? But I wasn't going to have that at that time. And back then, I thought that the senior editors that worked with me agreed with me. I think they did. But there were certainly people on The Age, including Michael, who thought I had not let him publish that cartoon because I was Jewish. He actually got some cartoonist from America to write to me and say, I'm also a son of a Holocaust survivor. I understand why you did it.
In the front, yeah.
I just wanted to tease out a little bit more about your views about the media coverage here in Australia. And I feel like we've obviously lost that war because of the biases that we read about or we hear on the television.
We have to stop, apparently.
Oh, no, we've got 3 minutes, I think. 3 minutes?
Okay.
Yeah.
So very briefly, I mean, what is the solution? How can we change this in any way?
Well, you can switch from The Age to the Australian, for instance, which people are doing. I mean, if you don't like, you'd probably feel much more comfortable with the Australians' coverage than you would of The Age. So switch. That's the thing. You have got power. Your power is to say, I'm not buying this thing anymore. I'm not watching this thing anymore, right? I mean, what is happening at the...
That doesn't change the attitude of the Age journalists, would it change that? I mean, that's just...
No, but you've got a choice about what you read and what you listen to. Make that choice. That's all you can do. I mean, that's what you can do.
So we've got time for one more. You've got a question? Great, okay.
You hear me?
Yes.
I was going to make a comment. I've been instructed.
No
don't
comment.
Think about it. So
Question.
it's sort of a double-barreled question. United
A
Nations.
question that contains a comment.
How responsible are the United Nations for what is happening worldwide to Jews, and what should they be doing?
I think. No, I can't answer that question. I mean, that question would take an hour to answer. I can't answer that question. You know, there are issues with the United Nations and the United Nations is a number of different bodies. Some are okay and some aren't. So I couldn't answer. I couldn't answer that question. We could have one.
Got one more, yeah, just
I
here.
might try one question that's a bit briefer,
Yeah.
but much more current. So a couple of days ago, the Wall Street Journal published an expose about a Jewish journalist who was part of a WhatsApp group of creatives and academics that was leaked, and many of us were doxxed earlier this year. And this Jewish journalist was a journalist for the New York Times. Do you have any thoughts on that? So getting back to journalist ethics and, you know, what's acceptable these days? Is it acceptable for Jewish journalists to be part of groups like this that are a space of safety for a lot of us? Do you think it's acceptable? What's happened?
Well, I am. I'm also on that WhatsApp group, and I know that there are other journalists that are on that WhatsApp group, but we're not on there as journalists. I mean, I'm not there to write a story or to, you know. I'm there because, you know, I feel like I am interested and part of a group of Jewish people who are concerned about what has happened in Australia with anti-Semitism. There's nothing wrong with being part of that group. I think it's a good group, and journalists should be part of it. Except they should know that they're not practicing journalism when they're doing that. They can't use that information as journalists. So of course, this is a private group. The person who did this has been a journalist for some time. She must have known that this was not a good thing to do. She thought, obviously, that she would do it with one person and it wouldn't go beyond that person. But how she could even think that, I don't know. What she did was unethical. The paper itself said it's unethical. But it is an example, for me, of what is wrong with journalism. It's another example of a journalism being an actor in a story. Rather than just reporting a story, they create a story. And that's not what journalism should be. That's what I've been on about. Journalists can't be activists. They can't belong to political parties. They can't be they can't be part of movements. You know, in 1970, when there were those huge anti-war moratorium marches, I was desperate to march. I was a journalist, right? I remember the editor calling the journalists in who were going to cover that story, telling us, don't you ever march in any of these demonstrations. Don't you ever be part of any sort of movement that you're going to have to report on at some stage. All that's gone out the window. You know, you have the journalist union saying that it's perfectly okay for journalists to be activists for the Palestinian cause. This is madness. So, of course, you get to the position where a journalist like that in the New York Times can do something like that. I mean, it's a kind of thing that journalists should never even cross their minds, that they are going to help someone who has an issue. I assume this was an issue with the ABC. They were going to help this person with their issue. She's a journalist. What is she doing? You know, journalists used to have this issue. Journalists who went to cover wars used to have this issue. Could they help someone who's been injured? Could they get a leave pass not to be shot at because they're neutral, right? Because, you know, I know of war correspondents who said they were tortured by something terrible was happening, right? They could have done something to help, but they would have compromised this sense that they have to be neutral. How many journalists think about these things today? How many journalists think about these sorts of issues? None.
We're out of time. Thank you. Can everyone give Michael a big round of applause? Thanks, James. Thank you all for coming. I wish we'd had more time. I feel like we're just getting started. There's a long way to go.
Hey, hang on. If you want to buy a book and you haven't read it yet, go down to the hub. James,
will you sign it?
This is the main reason you're here.
Yes.
You can go
My Life
down
as a
there.
Jew, out there somewhere. Michael will sign a copy for you.
If you want, down in the hub.
He's also got a blog, which you should read. There you go.